Hi, my name is Glenn Scheid, and I serve as chair of the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience at NSU. I'd like to congratulate you all on your admission and look forward to seeing you in the fall as you'll be joining us as new students. And I'd like to give you just sort of a quick little mini lecture that illustrates the topics of interest to me in my research area and teaching area as well. And the two general areas are human sexuality and evolutionary psychology. And I sort of bring those together in the classes that I teach. And so what I want to talk about today is the sexual revolution, which if you're not familiar with it, it started in the US and also a lot of other industrialized Western nations around the same time, about 1967. And a lot of sociologists, psychologists, sexologists over the years have speculated about why it started specifically in 1967 as opposed to a century earlier, a decade later, any other time. And the tendency generally is to look at the immediate surroundings, what's going on in terms of women's rights movement or civil rights movements in general, the rise of youth culture, the advent and availability of the birth control pill. And another thing that comes up a lot of times is war. They suggest either just the threat of imminent death that was posed by the Cold War and nuclear standoff between the US and Soviet Union, or the prolonged war in Vietnam could have just warped people's general inhibitions that they would have had and thought, we're all going to die anyway, so what's the sense in waiting to have sex? Let's just go and enjoy ourselves while we can. And what I want to suggest is, in fact, warfare may have, in fact, played a large role, or just war may have played a large role here, but not the war that was going on at the time, but rather World War II, which had already ended decades earlier, could actually have been causally responsible for the timing of the sexual revolution. And that seems like sort of a disjointed claim, but I'd like to sort of piece it together for you. And hopefully this will sort of illustrate the way that I think through these things and what the topics are that I tend to teach about in my classes. So the first thing to be aware of is there are sex differences in age preferences. So males generally prefer mates who are at least a little bit younger than themselves, and females generally prefer mates who are at least a little bit older than themselves. So as far as heterosexual couples are concerned, that sort of works out nicely. The next thing is that there's an even more substantial sex difference in what psychologists sometimes call sociosexuality, which is just a willingness to engage in casual sex or to engage in sex in the absence of any long-term romantic commitment. And there's a landmark study by Clark and Hatfield, this is all the way back in 1989, where there were Confederates of the experimenters who went around on a college campus. If you take my class, I'll tell you which college campus it was. It was a university somewhere in the state of Florida, not NSU, but another one that you've surely heard of. And these student Confederates or research assistants went up to opposite sex people on campus and they said, hey, I've noticed you around campus. I found you attractive. Would you like to go back to my place and have sex? Which is sort of a surprising thing to have happen to you if you're walking around campus. But the result is interesting and illustrates a lot about differences between males and females. About 2/3 of the men said, yes, absolutely, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me, and things like that. Some of the men who said no, the authors reported in a discussion, were trying to get a rain check. They were like, well, I would like to, but I have this exam coming up right now. How about tomorrow? Things like that. Whereas for females who were asked by males, 0% of them, zero of the female participants said yes. There are other studies where you just ask people, like, how many sex partners would you like to have in your life? And women on average between 2.5 and 3 is what you typically find. For men, it tends to be like 60, 70, somewhere in that range. So the difference is more than an order of magnitude. And the next concept sort of important to understand here in order to piece together the link between World War II and the timing of the sexual revolution is just the effects of mating dynamics and operational sex ratios. So if you have a population I'll give sort of an extreme example to illustrate. If you have a population, let's just say it's an island, isolated population, and there's one man living there, and there are 20 women living there, and somebody is going to mate with somebody, or some combination of people will be mating. But whoever is outnumbered in that scenario, whether it's one man and then 20 women who are potential mates, or one woman and 20 men who are potential mates, it's the one who's outnumbered that gets the say over what the relationship will be and who gets to be in a relationship with them. And that's just generally true. The way that mating dynamics work is sort of like an economic marketplace is one way to think of it, where there's supply and demand. And if you're very much in demand and don't have much of a supply, then you get more influence over what happens in the mating dynamics in the marketplace. So one of the things that's important to know about World War II, as you may already know, there was a giant baby boom. This is where the boomers came from, just this giant rise in national fertility immediately after the war ended in 1945. So the late 1940s, early 1950s, just an enormous number of children born. But it's not just that, but that there were a very small number of children born during the war, because fathers who would otherwise be begetting offspring during those years were off in the Pacific and off in Europe fighting the war. And so you have this very low rate of national fertility followed by a very high rate of national fertility, so that when those children come of age, which is in the 1960s, what you have are the girls who were born in the baby boom grow up. Now they're old enough, they're looking for mates. And what do they want? Well, the first thing that I mentioned in this list here is there's the sex difference in age preferences. So these young women are going to be looking for men who are a few years older than they are, which is to say men who were born in the early 1940s. And because that was the period where fertility was suppressed, where nationwide birth rate was suppressed because of the ongoing war, there just aren't very men to go around. So the handful of men who are there, now they're outnumbered and they get to sort of control the dynamics of the marketplace. And if you look at the research that I've already talked about on sex differences in mating preferences in terms of like how long do they want to wait before they bring a relationship to that level, and how well do they have to get to know somebody before they've decided, okay, now I want to be sexually active with this person. What you see then in the 1960s is no surprise. When you put the males in charge of determining what the timing of relationships is going to be, what you have at the level of the entire society is a sexual revolution, because there's very few men and a very large number of women who are interested in looking for relationships with these guys. And the guys are like, well, I can be as selective as I want to be since there are 20 women here who are interested in dating me. I get to say how the relationships go, and voila, sexual revolution emerges from that. So there's a lot going on there, but I think all of it is helpful in illustrating some of the most interesting and important concepts from the study of human sexuality and from the study of evolutionary psychology. And if you take a class with me in the fall or in any point in the next few years, you'll get to learn more about these topics, and I'd be happy to have you in my class. So thank you for listening, and look forward to seeing you on campus. Take care.